Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You may be seated. We would like to welcome you to our first presidential Democratic debate. Before we begin, we ask of the candidates to present any and all information in a proper manner and to not resort to any ad hominem or personal insults. We ask for you to not interrupt the person speaking and to respectfully raise your hand before speaking. You will only speak when a moderator asks you a question or when your name or an issue you stand for comes up in debate. To begin, we will ask each of you with your opening statements no more than a minute in length. Shauna.
Hi, my name is Shauna Stewart, and for my presidential election, I wanted to address 4 main topics, including economical, environmental, and educational. For me, and immigration. For me, those are the 4 main topics that are very important. For education, I have a couple of bullet points I want to address. First, I want to make double investments on Pell Grant and more tax on credits, and then I want to actually make college tuition tax deductible. Since education is top priority, I want all of our teachers to pass a rigorous curriculum in order for them to be licensed within each state. For economical, I wanted to restore our budget and cut the deficit over the next 4 years. Also, I would also want to encourage affordable housing. And for environmental, I wanted to develop renewable energy and efficient vehicles. Also, invest in tech, transportation, and earth friendly. These are a couple of bullet points. I will go more in depth with them after this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Justin Barrett, and for my presidential campaign, I would like to address 3 main issues, which is immigration, education, and economic growth. For immigration, I plan on incorporating a way for immigrants to become citizens in a more time-friendly manner, one that doesn't involve lengthy processes to becoming American citizens. For education, I want to decrease the amount of cost it would take to attend state community colleges and universities, and also offer teachers the right resources and training it takes to actually prepare students for their future. And for economic growth, I would like to give working families a raise and tax relief to better their economic standing and create good paying jobs that could allow them to not only succeed now, but succeed later in the future. And these are just 3 of my main topics, and I would hope to expand on them throughout the debate. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Larry Singh, and I stand for 3 major issues: education, economy, and immigration. And through my presidency, I will improve education by reducing standardization, increasing funding in the public education sector, and creating incentives for students to further their education. For the economic growth, I will tax the wealthier members of society higher because they need to pay their fair share, and provide tax relief for small businesses and people of the middle class. For immigration, I will keep programs like DACA in operation to prevent people from deportation, as well as comprehensive immigration reform to create a full path to citizenship. And I will elaborate on this as the debate goes on.
My name is Colin Ermine, and when it comes down to it, my campaign centers on the key idea of reform. It's time for change in this country. We must start today. Not tomorrow, not next week, not next year. Today. The 3 systems in which I seek to reform are as follows: education, healthcare, and taxation. It's time that we revamp these systems and bring the United States into the 21st century along with the other developed nations in this world. As an extension of these reforms, my campaign will also involve a push for a significant reduction in excess military spending, a mandate for corporations to implement a federal profit-sharing program, and to fight for the legalization of marijuana. Altogether, these will allow for the success of my reform agenda while also tackling the issue of income inequality. It's time to make America great again, the right way. So when it comes to true change, you have to know that Ermine is your guy. Thank you. God bless you all. God bless the United States of America.
Thank you. Okay, for the debate, you guys will remain seated.
And just to say, these are general questions. Whoever would like to speak up and talk first, obviously that's the point of a debate.
Do you want to set a time limit for?
Yes, and you cannot speak more than 1 minute
1
at
minute,
a time.
okay.
Democrats believe all children should be able to lead happy, successful lives. However, the United States is falling behind on the world scale in terms of education and educational achievements, where our students are being forced to compete with not only their neighbors, but with equally qualified people around the world. How will you ensure that the next generation has access to a quality education and educational tools to drive our economy forward and tip the scales in favor of our students?
Well, actually, I would like to give teachers the resources and the training that it would take in order for them to help our students succeed here in this country. I believe that there are so many high school students that graduate without the ability to read and write and do basic mathematics, and that's not right. I believe that teachers should be given the correct sources in order to allow our students to succeed not only in high school but also in college, and also increase an incentive to keep them furthering their education even after their undergraduate success, to further on go on to graduate programs and professional college development.
Right. So while I agree with Mr. Barrett on this issue, in that regards with teachers, I think we need to go further. We need to revamp the entire education system. We need to go in and start from the ground up, because right now the system we have was built over a century ago it was kind of a factory kind of system for the people that would go into work into factories. Everything's on pass and fail, whether you did the assignment or not. No one cares about whether if you actually learn anything. No one cares about actually furthering their education anymore. They want to just get their grades, get their whatever, and just move on. But we need to create a system that promotes education and promotes thought and promotes people actually learning things. And so you would have to revamp the whole system where it starts from the ground up, where you instill motivation to learn in the students. And so I think that's where we should be moving towards, and actually working as a country to rebuild the education system and implement a national standardization that brings everyone to a higher level so that we can progress and make America better than it is. Because right now we're falling behind on all the other nations in regards to education. It's time for that to change.
Thank you, Colin. You mentioned standardization of education. I'd like to hear from each of the candidates on your position of the Common Core standards, beginning with you, Shauna.
As we all know, the Common Core, we have, like, let's say in the state of Nevada, they obviously, like, let's say in New York, they learn, they have an advantage, and compared to us, our students aren't learning as much as, let's say, as the state of New York. So I'd say we must create a curriculum, a standardized curriculum where all students within the United States are learning at the same pace.
So do you support the Common Core standards?
No.
Okay, Justin?
I believe that we need to increase the Common Core standards, only because through Common Core, our students are taught how to pass a test of their proficiencies, most likely. And it's not geared towards future success, but rather on passing high school. And I believe that as a nation, we need to set a Common Core standard for all 50 states, not just individual states.
Larry?
I will have to disagree with that. I feel the Common Core is lacking in many aspects, because a test is not a measure of how successful you will be at a particular subject. The test is a measure of how well you studied or how well you prepared. It's not a measure of what you actually know. And this is why I believe the Common Core needs to be dumped for a better system.
Thank you. Colin?
I sort of agree with Mr. Singh. What it comes down to, I believe that the idea of the Common Core, have a national standardization, a set that everyone needs to follow, is a good idea, but the way it's been implemented in the country, I do not agree with. I think we need to reform the whole system, and we need to work to creating a standard like other countries do. China, Japan, Germany, Sweden, all these countries that are far passing us in education have a standard where they have this national standard, and we need to follow that kind of agenda where we have a national standardization, but we need to work on building people up and getting motivated in education so that these standards will work on all across the states.
Thank you. Okay. This question is for Larry. Larry, if you're elected, you might have a Republican Senate, and you will most certainly face a Republican House. You have some pretty ambitious goals. How are you going to get them passed through Congress?
So I'm going to work very closely with all the members in the Senate and the House to come to a consensus and come to an agreement as quickly as possible by using all the resources I have.
Can you be more specific about what resources you have to get this legislation through Congress?
Yes. So essentially, they don't work together because there's not a sense of compromise between the House and the Senate and the Democrats and Republicans. I'm going to work hard and work with everyone to compromise and ensure that everyone gets a fair say and everyone comes to a consensus and an agreement.
Thank you, Larry.
Our military is the largest and most advanced in the world at the cost of $811 billion a year, 1.25 times the amount we spend the rest of the world's military combined. Do you believe that offense is the best defense, or would you change the amount that we spend?
Colin?
Right. I definitely think we need a change in the amount that we're spending on military. As it was already mentioned, that we're spending more than the world combined and then some. And right now, I think the proper number is about we're spending 3 times more than China is on their military. So we're vastly outspending every other country in the world on military spending, and we need to reduce that because there's other systems in this country that we need to put more money towards, like healthcare, education, other social security kind of things, but we need to help the people rather than focusing on the military. Because right now we're just leagues ahead of the other nations. We need to we can cut back to where maybe we're only twice as much as China. And that'll leave hundreds of billions of dollars to put in other areas of this country, like NASA and other areas of progress. And I really think we need to reduce it because we're already leagues ahead. Our Air Force is the #1 in the world, and then we also have the second greatest Air Force in the world. That's the United States Navy. The air arsenal that we have in the Navy is greater than any other country. We're way powerful than anyone else, and we can cut back.
Okay. This question is directed to Shauna. Every candidate says they're going to break the stranglehold of special interests in Washington. If nobody has been able to do it before, why do you think you would?
If no one has been able to do it before, I think I would be able to do it because, can you repeat the question, please?
Sure, certainly. Every candidate says they're going to break the stranglehold of special interests in Washington. If nobody has been able to do it before, why do you think you would?
I would be able to do it because with the support of the people. Can I answer the question?
Okay, moving on.
The United States of America is the only first world country in the world that does not offer free healthcare to all its citizens. Even with legislation such as the Affordable Care Act, 55% of Americans do not receive any medical care because they believe it is too expensive. How do you plan to change that without aggressively raising taxes on the average American that would consume such medical care?
We're not going to raise taxes on the average American. We're going to raise it on the top 1%, the wealthiest members of society, to help fund health.
I agree with Mr. Singh on that issue. I believe that the 1%ers have enough money to where they can afford an increase in taxes, where the lower class cannot afford to have their taxes increased any further than what they've already been increased over the past few years. So I believe that we can take the amount of spending that we do on such things as the military and put it towards more beneficial things for this country.
So you will not raise taxes?
No, I will not raise taxes.
Colin?
I'm interested in knowing, Mr. Singh and Mr. Barrett's, what your plan is. That you kind of just dodged the question. We want to know what your plan for healthcare is. Well, not about how you're going to tax. What's the healthcare plan? What's your idea for that?
In response?
Okay, so basically, the plan is to implement a system like other countries such as Canada, the UK, to where healthcare is provided by the government for the people. Because doing so, we will reduce the cost overall, and insurance companies are essentially misusing people at this point by profiting off of them for healthcare, which is pretty essential. So if it's run by the government, for the people, then there's no issue there. It's not.
So you plan to kick out insurance companies?
Yes.
Anyone else?
Sorry.
Mr. Barrett?
Okay, for my plan for healthcare is to incorporate a system that is available to all the citizens of the United States of America. And by doing that, I would like to close corporate tax loopholes and make the most fortunate pay their share, because they're not doing that through many different contracts and through their many expansive lawyers who find different ways where they can avoid paying as much taxes as they should be paying. And I also believe that I can create good paying jobs that can help the lower class and the middle class be able to afford the amount of healthcare that it takes in order to survive in this country as is.
Colin?
All right, so what the others are kind of referring to is actually a single-payer healthcare system, and basically under this under the single-payer system, all residents of the United States would be covered for all medically necessary services, including doctors, hospital visits, preventative, long-term health care, all sorts of these things. And other countries with single-payer healthcare systems pay less per capita for the health care than we currently do, and the system will allow us to spend less on health care and to ensure that everyone has health care as a right. As a citizen, when you're born, you get the right to health care. And to pay for this system, I'm proposing that we would have various new taxes, such as a 6.7% employer payroll tax, a 5.4% tax on high-income individuals, a 0.02% tax on security transactions, and a regressive tax on people making between $200,000 and $600,000 per year. And that's not on the middle class. It's people who are rich and who can afford to pay their extra share.
Thank you. We have a question from the Twitterverse. This is from Michelle, and she's asking, how do you plan on reducing the damage that is being done to the environment as a result of global warming? This is for all candidates. Go ahead, Colin. You have 1 minute.
All right. Well, I plan to take on the other big interests in this country, such as oil and the other industries that are focusing away from any alternative sources of energy, and they're focusing on fossil fuels and other things that are damaging to the environment. So what we want to do is I want to create initiatives that block the further expansion into oil drilling and anything like that, and provide incentives for people, for companies and other people and the scientists to research areas such as wind, solar, geothermal, all these other types of different energy, so that we can move our country away from oil and fossil fuels and focus on a sustainable future.
Okay. Anyone else? How are you going to combat global warming? No? Moving on? Okay.
Speak again.
Well, you just went, Colin.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So coming back to the healthcare issue, you guys talked about a tax plan for the top 1%. However, when presented with the fact that the top 0.1% of the country's richest people are worth almost as much as the bottom 99%, it is obvious that they do need to pay their fair share of taxes. However, with tax havens, shell companies, and equity swaps, the richest of the rich seem to always find ways to evade such taxes. How would you propose a tax system that makes sure everybody does pay their fair share? Larry?
Okay, so an example of this would be companies such as Google, Apple, who open an office in another country to evade U.S. taxes. This is a big problem. To combat this, I would require that they have their office in this country if they're operating in this country, to make sure that they pay their fair share in taxes and all that money goes to the United States government.
Anybody else? Colin?
In terms of corporations, I kind of agree with Mr. Singh on the whole creating legislation that requires companies, if they're going to operate here in the United States, they need to keep their headquarters here in the United States, and so they can pay their taxes for corporations. But I also want to revamp the system for taxation on mostly everyone. Basically, the income tax, I think, right now is ineffective in making people pay their fair share, and it's a lot of loopholes that people can get exempt. So I believe if we introduce a sales tax, a flat sales tax for everyone, and create legislation that if you bring something into the country that you bought somewhere else, it would implement the sales tax on that. And that way everyone's paying their fair share for what they purchase, and then everyone can get their revenue and no one evades this tax.
This is for everybody. We've spent a lot of time talking about gun violence lately, but we seldom talk about the central fact of guns in America, which is that there are already over 300 million of them in private hands. Does that mean we're doomed to have a high rate of gun violence no matter what we do, that we can only reduce it at the margins? Go ahead, Larry.
We can reduce gun violence on a massive scale if we implement stricter background checks, no same-day purchasing of firearms, and also ensuring that anyone who tries to purchase a firearm is examined by a psychiatrist to ensure that there is no misuse of those firearms that are being purchased.
I
John?
support Mr. Singh because it is important that we do have these background checks. As we may see in the normal high school, we could see that everyone looks normal, but however, you don't know when someone can just pull out a gun and go crazy. So it may not be 100% sure that with a psychiatric check that we may know if this person is crazy or not. However, we may be a little bit more, we may be sure, so like we could feel safer than if someone who didn't have that check would know.
Mr. Barrett, your position?
I do agree with both the other candidates on this issue. I do agree that we can't afford to have more checkpoints before a person is legally allowed to obtain a firearm. And I believe that, and I do agree with Mr. Singh saying that a psychiatric evaluation of every person who purchases a gun, and even people who already own guns, that we can ensure to ourselves that we are safe against any likely threats.
Colin?
All right, so I agree with the stricter background checks and implementing psychiatric testing to ensure that people who purchase guns are actually, fit to actually carry the weapon. And I think we need to go further and make people go through courses that actually teach them how to use a firearm and how to make sure that it's properly used and everything's totally safe when they have the firearm. But we also need to focus on, because as you mentioned earlier, that's just kind of on the margins. If we do that now, it's only the people that are buying guns now. What about all the people that have weapons? We need to create incentives for people to give up their weapons, not force them, but like incentives that allow people, hey, if you give this weapon, you get this in return. And we also need to go after weapon suppliers, people who make guns, to make sure that the weapons are not falling into the wrong hands so they can get into illegal distribution channels. We need to focus on that as well, because we can't have illegal gun buyers as well.
Thank you. So we'll have, you take one and I'll do the last one.
The United States Constitution was written on hemp paper, and it is well documented that most of the founding fathers grew hemp in their own backyards. Marijuana has also been recently growing in popularity to not only treat mental illnesses, but also to treat the side effects and pain that come with serious illnesses such as cancer and glaucoma. However, a study done by the Federal Bureau of Crime Statistics says that 79% of all violent offenders nationwide tested positive for the usage of marijuana. 23% of those crimes were done directly under the influence of marijuana. What is your stance on the legalization of marijuana?
So as I mentioned earlier, I'm for the legalization of marijuana. As the country, as we've seen in Colorado and Oregon, where they've implemented the legalization of marijuana, crime rates have gone down and the general welfare of the public has gone up. Because through a legalization of marijuana, we take the power away from the drug dealers and the people who are going behind the backs of the cops and to actually get the drugs to people. We can actually control the distribution of marijuana and tax it, make so that's revenue for the government. We can also make sure that it's the best product that you can, so that people are not getting dangerous products from off the streets. It's controlled distribution, and we're able to tax and lower crime rates.
Nobody else has a stance on the legalization of marijuana?
No? Okay, this will be our last question, and this will be for all of our candidates. The following is completely legal and routinely practiced in the United States. Lobbyists write laws, then give money to politicians voting on them. Politicians take money from the industries they regulate. Special interests pay for politicians' vacations and lavish gifts. Politicians leave Congress to take lucrative jobs as lobbyists. Politicians give tax breaks and corporate welfare to their funders. As president, what specific steps would you take to fix our corrupt political system? Colin?
We need to create legislation that creates stricter punishments for members of Congress in getting involved in this kind of activity, and banning the use of special interest giving to Congress and allowing for lobbyists to fight for such and use money to fight for such broad range of issues. Because right now it's just a breeding ground for corruption, and we need to combat this system by ensuring that congressmen are not falling into this this pit of corruption. And what we need to do, maybe perhaps provide, if congressmen do not think they're well supplied enough, we can help them out in that area. But we also need to focus on making sure that corporations are not running Congress. And so if we introduce legislation that stops their influence in Congress, we can help reduce this problem.
Great, thank you, Colin.
I do agree with candidate Colin on this issue. Essentially, you're saying that money rules this country, and because of that, I do believe that we can have legislation and many acts to help suppress this and ensure that Congress, that the different branches of government essentially can function without the use or the bribery of big corporations that offer the money to exchange in their enaction of certain laws and things like that.
Anyone else? Okay, you want to do like a final remark? No, I meant the candidates. I'll tell you what, candidates, let's do one last final remark. We'll start from Colin and we'll go down. Let's limit that to about 30 seconds or so. So final remark, or
Right.
closing remark.
So, as I mentioned earlier, we're all about reform. And so if you support Colin Ermine, you're fighting for a change in this country. You want to go and make sure that people have health care, that people have access to a greater education, and this country is progressing forward and not backwards. We want to make sure that people, that we're cutting spending on military and putting it into more proper areas, and we're making sure that the rich are paying their fair share and that everyone is getting what they deserve.
I'm Larry Singh, and for fighting the man, I am your man.
Okay, as president, I plan on making this country greater than it already is through my many ideas on education and immigration and foreign policy. I do believe that I can change this country, and I believe that I am the right person to do so.
I will ensure that all the education policies and immigration laws will so we can have better immigration laws as well as education. I will ensure that for you. And as president, I will make sure our students will get the best education.
Okay, that concludes our debate. Let's give them a hand, guys.